Chapter 3 starts off with classical and Hellenistic Greece. This chapter surveys the political and cultural history of the Greek polis, like we talked about in Chapter 2, and in the period of their greatest power from about 479 to 338 BCE, and continues the story to the eve of the Roman conquest about 150 BCE. After the Persian retreat from Greece, Athens emerged as the leader of a coalition of Greek states of the Aegean Islands and the coast of Asia Minor, also as part of the Delian League. Athens collected tribute from these states to finance a war to free those Greeks still under Persian rule, to protect all against a Persian return, and to gather booty. Cimon led the allies to victory and became the most influential statesman in Athens for nearly 2 decades. In the late 460s, however, in the wake of foreign reverses, Cimon was ostracized. Euphrates and Pericles attacked and overturned his policies of conservationism at home and friendly relations with Sparta abroad. For about 15 years, Athens, in alliance with Argos, pursued an intermittent war with Sparta for control of the Greek mainland. This was part of the First Peloponnesian War. Initially, Athens was victorious, but it was soon forced to make peace with Persia and then with Sparta. A lasting result of the war was that Athens exercised stricter control over its allies. The Delian League then became the Athenian Empire. Led by Pericles, Athens, after about 445, pursued a conservative foreign policy of maintaining its empire and remaining at peace with Sparta. Even as the Athenians were tightening control over their allies, at home they developed the freest government the world had ever seen. Under the leadership of Pericles, the powers of the aristocratic council, the Areopagus, were curtailed, and every decision of the state had to be approved by the popular assembly. As well, jury pay was introduced, and the actions of government officials were scrutinized carefully at the end of their terms. Pericles voiced the pride that the Athenians felt for their democracy in his famous funeral oration. Despite all of this theoretical freedom, political privilege was restricted to citizens, thus making Athenian citizenship a prized commodity. The text analyzes the position of women in the state, noting their complete lack of political rights and the legal restrictions to which they were subject. The role of a woman was to bear male heirs and tend to domestic duties. The only public role of a woman was in various rituals and festivals of the state religion. However, the mythology of the time suggests that some women may have played more prominent roles in both public and private life. The story of Asphasia, Pericles' companion, is offered as evidence of a powerful, intelligent woman exerting considerable influence over public affairs. Debate over the legal versus actual place of a woman in society remains. Slavery also was a part of Greek life. Slaves were most likely war captives, and while their service was forced, they could gain freedom and even rise in society. Though the extent of slavery in society is disputed, the Greeks certainly supported a chattel slavery-like system. Religion was a civic matter of patriotism and citizenship rather than of faith. Failure to carry out religious duties was an assault on the state and could be punished by death. Religious and political life were inseparable. The 30 Years' Peace of 445 BCE lasted for only a decade. In 435, a dispute involving the island of Corcyra forced the Athenians to side against an important ally of Sparta, Corinth. The deep-seated distrust between Sparta and Athens, coupled with the aggressive arguments of Corinth, resulted in a Spartan declaration of war in 432. The chapter continues with a more detailed narration of the great Peloponnesian War that was fought, with a short period of unstable peace, for the next 27 years. This long and disastrous war eventually led to the defeat of Athens and shook the foundations of Greek civilization. The collapse of the Athenian Empire created a vacuum of power in the Aegean and opened the way for Spartan leadership, or hegemony. Unable to maintain control of the various Greek coalitions, Spartan leadership soon passed to Thebes, which was headed by the great general Epaminondas. The Theban hegemony ended with the death of Epaminondas. Although Athens had rebuilt its Aegean Empire, Its subjects succeeded in revolting in 355. The Greeks were more disorganized now than ever. In the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, the Greek civilization flourished and produced cultural achievements that justify the designation of the classical period. The chapter recounts the contributions of the Attic tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, who dealt with powerful cosmic themes and great confrontations of conflicting principles, as well as the psychology and behavior of human beings under stress. The century also produced the first prose literature in the form of history. Herodotus, also known as the father of history, wrote an account of the Persian Wars, while Thucydides contributed his masterpiece on the Peloponnesian War. Thucydides has been called a scientific historian for his devotion to accuracy and truth. Athenian architecture and sculpture also flourished, reaching their acme in the temples of the Acropolis, above all the Parthenon. The brilliance of these buildings gave confirmation to Pericles' statement that Athens was the school of Hellas. 5th century philosophers continued their predecessors' interest in the nature of the universe, but more important was the emphasis placed on man and his institutions by the itinerant teachers called sophists. These disillusionment felt by many Greeks after the destruction of the Peloponnesian War and the political chaos of the 4th century was also reflected in the art and philosophy of the period. Comedy replaced tragedy as the most popular dramatic form of the period. Mythological subjects were abandoned in favor of domestic satire, portraying life with comic realism. Sculpture also reflected the trend away from the grand ideals and toward ordinary, real subjects. The crisis of the polis is perhaps most clearly evident in the philosophy of the time. The text engages in an in-depth survey of major philosophical figures, including Socrates, the Cynics, Plato, and Aristotle. Although Socrates believed that the laws of a polis had a legitimate claim on its citizens, his student Plato advocated a reorganization of the state, which should not be ruled by the masses but by philosopher kings. Plato's pupil Aristotle shared his concern for the crisis of the polis, but proposed a more realistic solution, a state governed not by the wisest, but by the most moderate, the middle class. At the beginning of the 4th century, Macedon, the land to the north of Thessaly, was a backward, semi-barbaric kingdom, beset by civil strife, loose organization, and a lack of money. Despite these problems, Philip II rose to unify the Macedonians and led them to victory over the Greek city-states to the south. Beginning in the 350s BCE, Philip removed his internal enemies and used the knowledge gained while a hostage in Thebes under Epaminondas to reorganize the Macedonian army and elevate the cavalry to the decisive role in battle. The Greek city-states to the south were weakened militarily and were mired in political chaos and indecision about whether to accept or reject Philip as hegemon. The famous debates between Isocrates and Demosthenes testify to the impotence of the Greek states to commit themselves to unified action for or against Philip. At Chaeronea in 338, Philip defeated the Greek army and became ruler of Greece. The chapter then proceeds to give a more detailed account of Macedonian government in Greece, the assassination of Philip, and the succession of Alexander the Great. His exploits against the Persian Empire are next recounted, as are his death and the struggle for succession to his position in empire. Alexander's conquest marked the end of the central role of the polis in Greek life and thought. Cities prospered, but without political freedom, they had only a shadow of the vitality of the true polis. In this new environment, most Greeks turned away from political solutions to their problems and sought instead personal salvation through religion, philosophy, and magic. The confident humanism of the 5th century BCE gave way to a kind of resignation of man's fate to chance. The new attitude was reflected in philosophy. Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum continued to be important, but changed somewhat in their emphases. Two new schools that offered ways of dealing with the insecurities of the times, however, flourished. Epicureanism sought not knowledge but happiness, which followers expected to find in a life based on reason. The Epicureans, in order to free men from the fear of death and all non-material powers, emphasized sense perception. They believed that the true happiness depended on the avoidance of pain and advocated withdrawal from public life. Stoicism was founded in Athens about 300 BCE by Zeno of Cyprus. Their school advised men to live in harmony with the gods and nature by living in accordance with divine reason. A philosophy almost indistinguishable from religion. The wise Stoic knew what was good, what was evil, and what was indifferent. Above all, he avoided passion. Withdrawal was counseled, but duty was important and political activity allowed. In the Hellenistic world, the city flourished, and the diversity and intellectual richness of Hellenistic civilization thrived in the life of one of the most important cities of the time, Alexandria, which was located in Egypt. It was here that scholars copied and preserved in the famous library the literature of the classical age. Wealthy royal patrons also supported art and sculpture, which now emphasized sentimental and realistic modes. Perhaps the Hellenistic period's most lasting achievements were in mathematics and science, for they stood until the scientific revolution of the Renaissance. Euclid and Archimedes made great progress in geometry and physics and advocated both the heliocentric and geocentric theories of planetary movement. Eratosthenes offered a more detailed and accurate map of the world. This concludes the chapter summary for Chapter 3, Classical and Hellenistic Greece.